sets it a little bit to the left. 11 yards shy of the record. Williams breaks the hole. Williams, hello, record book. Ricky Williams runs to the Hall of Fame. Touchdown. Ricky Williams, touchdown.
Young from the shotgun. Back to throw. Vince looks. Under pressure. He'll tuck it in run. Vince to the 5. Young. Touchdown, Texas. Touchdown, Vince Young. He's done it again. Vince Young has given the Longhorns the lead with 19 seconds to play in the game.
Longhorn Nation, we're back.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Lone Star Lowdown podcast brought to you by Texas Longhorns On SI. My name is Matt Galatzan and I will be your host. And today I'm joined, as always, by my co-host Zach Dimmitt, who is our deputy editor over there on Texas Longhorns On SI. Zach, how is it going?
It's going pretty good. There's a lot of stuff that's just happened the past, a few minutes, hours, and then stuff that's going to be happening later tonight as well with the draft. So a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. And we picked a good day to get back at it. We took yesterday off because I was feeling a little bit under the weather, and Zach had a fun little golf trip with his buddies. So we're back at it for draft day and for a lot of other stuff. But let's start with the Texas Longhorns news. First off, in the transfer portal. First thing that happened today, big time commitment for the Longhorns. Simeon Wilcher, guard out of St. John's, commits to the Longhorns. Gives them their theoretically gives them their starting point guard if all things are go as we expect. He's a big time player out of a big time program, has tournament experience, and fits kind of the profile of what Sean Miller is looking to do. So Zach, you are the basketball expert. Tell us how you think Wilcher. Yeah, well, close enough. Tell us how you think Wilcher fits into this team and how impactful you think the signing is going to be.
Yeah, well, I think it's really big for them. First of all, I think it's interesting how you don't see a lot of New Jersey guys coming to Texas, and now on the football team we have Murad Watson coming from New Jersey as well, and then now Simeon Wilcher, another New Jersey guy. I know it's two different sports, which is kind of interesting that's happened pretty close together. But I think that he's a really good addition. I know he was a point guard coming out of high school. He originally came to North Carolina, but then went to St. John's with Rick Pitino, and I think I see him more as a combo guard. He was kind of the purest shooter on St. John's last season, which is definitely saying something. And it's not a knock on him; it's more of a knock on St. John's offense as a whole. They didn't have a ton of shooters. RJ Lewis and Aaron Scott, they by default had to lead the team in threes, even though they weren't exactly pure shooters. But Wilcher was kind of the best shooter out of that bunch, even if the numbers didn't show it necessarily. But he was really sought after by Ole Miss, BYU, Oregon, Dana Altman, Chris Beard, those guys are really after him. So some big programs are in the mix for him. I know he only averaged like 8 points last season, but don't get too much into the numbers. St. John's offense was not very good at all, and that's why you saw them get knocked out in the second round by Arkansas. But it's going to be interesting to see how he mixes in with Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope, Kendall Weaver, and those guys. Personally, we'll see how it goes, because I don't necessarily see him as a starting point guard, but he can, handle the ball and have point guard duties if asked to. But we saw Jordan Pope hint at the fact that he could be the starter. Things change on a dime pretty quickly. You never know how that. But yeah, I mean, he has some quick bounce in his game. He's not the most athletic guy, but he can definitely. He had a few posters last year. They're kind of like, oh, this guy can get off the ground pretty quickly. Catch and shoot. I think he has a little bit of everything to his game as a guard, and that's what you want to see. But Sean Miller saw firsthand last year what he was capable of in the two games against Xavier. The St. John's played. Wilcher had 15 points and 16 points respectively. So he wasn't like a big scoring guy last season, but Sean Miller saw exactly what he can do whenever they played St. John's last season. So it's hard to see him coming off the bench, because he's going into his third season, but this is like a we're in that kind of like selfish era of college athletics, but that doesn't mean that he's not willing to sacrifice and potentially come off the bench. So we'll see what happens. One of these guys is going to have to come off the bench, whether that's Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope, or Wilcher, because I just don't know if all three will start together. We'll see how that goes, but I think it's a big addition and kind of helps finalize the roster for sure.
Yeah, and if you ask me, and you're a little bit more versed on the Texas basketball program than I am, but if you ask me, I think that the idea was that Jordan Pope would be the starting point guard before this happened, and that now I think Sean Miller is probably going to go to Jordan Pope and say, "Hey, we still really like you. We still think you can be a huge part of what we're doing, but based on this and Wilcher's size and his ability, we think that you would be better suited being our, sixth or seventh man off the bench alongside Kendall Weaver, where we can bring both of you guys off the bench and really give us a spark both offensively and defensively, and we can have a more balanced roster in that sense." But we'll see. Sean Miller is still putting this together. There's still more moves to be made. I think that based on what other moves they make going forward here, whether they bring in another shooter or a recruit or something like that, it will sort of more from there where Wilcher fits in and where Jordan Pope fits in and where how this roster all kind of gels together. But this, is as big of a move as this was. There's still something that the Longhorns are lacking, and that is a big-time scorer. I don't know that that's coming. So it looks like Texas is going to have a little bit of a St. John's makeup, so to speak, where they don't have an elite scorer and they don't have a superstar like they had last year with Trey Johnson, who could score 30 points on a given night. So it's going to be a different makeup for this team. It's going to be something that, it's still going to be an exciting brand of basketball because they're going to get out and they're going to run. They're going to try and play a lot of defense and get going in transition and those kinds of things. We'll see how that works in the SEC. I think top to bottom, in terms of depth, this team is a little bit deeper than it was last year. Last year was a little bit more top heavy with Trey Johnson. Now you got a couple of bigs who filled a big need for you there, and so it's going to be a different makeup, but it's still a pretty talented team, and they could have a chance to make the tournament. We'll just have to see how that stacks up in the SEC. But this also wasn't the only transfer portal news that we saw out of Texas today. We also had Jamie Vincent go into the transfer portal as well, just right before we hopped on air, which was good timing because we were going to hop on a little earlier, and we got a little sidetracked with some NFL draft stuff and some other things, so we had to pop on a little later. Thank God, because now we get to talk about Vincent as it happens. So Zach, tell us how you think that this is going to affect Texas's depth next year. Is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? And do you think that this means that there's another move on the way?
Yeah, potentially, could open up that spot in the front court. And I think it's definitely notable. His loss didn't play a whole lot last season. 2.2 points per game. He was a freshman, really, really raw. And he was kind of a developmental piece for Rodney Terry forward. Obviously, the coaching changed. It was up in the air about whether he'd stay or not. And up to this point, there was no reason to think that he wouldn't stay. And so kind of came out of nowhere. But I guess not too surprising in a sense because you add Traore, you add Matas, the FAU center. So I guess he's looking for more playing time somewhere else. I'm thinking that he's got these two guys in front of him that are going to, potentially take away some of those minutes. But I think it was definitely notable. I mean, this guy, he's 6'11", and when I would go to the games last season or this past season, and I'd be on the court before the games, this guy was 6'11" is underselling it. He is absolutely huge. He was so long, and he can kind of shoot the basketball too. That's what's scary. He had a three this past season. I don't remember which game it was in. It was one of the non-conference games where they completely blew out like Chicago State or something like that. I forgot which game it was, but he is, I think he has tons of potential moving forward. He was an Austin native, went to high school here. And so, it was kind of nice to see him, potentially stay with the team. But then I guess things have changed since then. And so it's not a huge loss. He wasn't like, he was still relatively unproven, so it's not certain he was going to bring next season. You never know, but I think it would be nice if he'd have been able to develop under Sean Miller a little bit. But now he's going to be moving on, and so it definitely opens up a potential spot in the front court for them to add another developmental guy. But still, I mean, it's a depth issue for sure, a little bit. But Traore, Matas, and then Nick Cody as well. Those guys, that's a good front court, and add in like Camden Heide and Dalen Swain could play a little bit small ball forward as well. So I still think Texas is in a good spot, but yeah, they'll have to figure out some of that depth a little bit for sure.
Yeah, and we'll see what they do going forward. I think the transfer portal has now closed. So as of yesterday, so there's not going to be any more players really that pop in. There's still some players out there. There's still a bunch of fifth-year players who are looking for eligibility as well. So you could see Texas make a move in that vein. I would still like to see them get an elite scorer, but anything in terms of talent they could add to this roster, I think would be a big help. Another little piece of news that we saw yesterday that we should probably touch on a little bit as well, that just popped into my head was former Texas big man Dylan Mitchell is going to St. John's now. He was at Cincinnati last year after leaving Texas following, his really short stay at Texas. He goes to Cincinnati. He has a pretty good year. Now he's on his way to St. John's. He figures to be a kind of a big part of what they do. Do you think that this is a good move for Dylan Mitchell, or do you think that he should have found another spot?
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on this briefly. Yeah, I think it's a good move for him. I think like we were saying about St. John's, they don't really ask a lot offensively of their guys. It's about defense, rebounding, and hustle, and that's what Rick Pitino preaches, and that's all Dylan Mitchell is, and that's a compliment to him because he never was. He's never going to be the kind of guy that's going to drop 30 points. He's never going to take you off the dribble with some amazing offensive moves or anything. But he can run in transition. We saw that when he was at 2 years at Texas, and he's an elite rebounder, great shot blocker. But definitely should feel a little bit disappointing for Texas fans, seeing how it's played out for him in his career. I know, not all 5 stars work out, but I mean, he came into Austin under Chris Beard with some aspirations, potentially a one and done guy, and now he's going to be heading to his senior year of college. So I still think that there could be a path for him to potentially land with the NBA roster down the line. We'll see how that goes. But he's still in college for now, and so good for Rick Pitino though next season because Dylan Mitchell does everything that Rick Pitino asks of his players, and so I think it'll be exciting for sure. Definitely kind of interesting that Wilcher comes from St. John's, and now Mitchell, obviously a year at Cincinnati, now going to St. John's after being at Texas. So kind of interesting there, but yeah, I wish him the best, and he's a really good guy, and so. During his time at Texas, he was always great with the media and all that stuff, and so I hope it goes well for him.
Yeah, and he's one of these guys that you would have loved to see on the roster last year, given their deficiencies. But Texas has filled those holes now. They've got a couple bigs that they're pretty excited about. So pretty complete roster now for Texas. Before the Wilcher thing, it seemed like they were still trying to find some pieces to make this a real complete roster. Now you can go into the offseason. Still looking for pieces, but now you have a roster you can put on the court that you feel pretty good about, and it's pretty complete. So good things there for Texas basketball. We're going to talk some NFL draft here in a minute, but let's jump into a little bit of what Steve Sarkisian said this week during his media availability. A lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff. We're going to highlight a couple of them. The first thing that really jumped off the page to both of us, I think, was what he said about the quarterbacks and Arch Manning. We know that Arch is a different personality than Quinn. We know that Arch is a different kind of player than Quinn. There's this thought across college football, probably more so from an outside perspective than an inside perspective, that Arch is just going to come in and be the best quarterback that has ever played football in the history of football because he's a Manning and he had 2 really good games last year. Logically speaking, he's going to have some bumps in the road. He's still got a lot to learn. He's never been a full-time starter. And Sark mentioned a couple of things that he would like Arch to work on. Most notably, I think, was the leadership qualities. And he's not saying that Arch is not a good leader. In fact, it's quite the opposite. He's very impressed with what Arch has done so far. But he had some notes about Arch and these other QBs. Zach, why don't you dive into that a little bit and tell us, exactly what Sark is talking about here in terms of Arch and being a leader.
Yeah, like you said, it's not like he's saying he's not a leader. He definitely emphasized that. And I think, Arch is he's not a quiet guy at all. He's very, very confident, has tons of moxie, and that can carry over very well towards a leadership role. But as a quarterback of, at Texas, you're asked to be, one of the premier leaders in college football, arguably in all of college sports. It's like being the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. You have a spotlight on you 24/7. And so Arch understands that, obviously. And I think being a leader will come as the rest of the offseason goes on, leading into fall. And then during the season, it'll take some time as well. But, we saw it with Quinn as his time at Texas went on. Wasn't like the most vocal guy right away, but then you see last season when he was injured, I forget which game it was, but he's in the huddle with all those guys just pumping him up. And you see Jahdae Barron getting in his face, and they're getting all excited about everything, and he's pumping those guys up. And you really saw him develop into a leader during his time here. And the same could definitely happen for Arch, because he's, like I said, he's far from a quiet guy. His teammates love him, speak highly of him, and so that makes being a leader even easier for him. And so, but yeah, and it just makes you even more excited to hear what Stark said about the guys that are behind him. Trey Owens and KJ Lacey. Two interesting names to watch, of course. Knock on wood that Arch stays healthy all season, but let's say he misses a few snaps here and there, maybe even a game. Trey Owens will have to step up in there and show what he can do, and KJ Lacey could get some action as well. And fortunately, live action seems to be where they both thrive, because Sark said that all three quarterbacks, when it comes to like walkthroughs and drills and stuff like that, they're all good players, but he said they really turn it on when scrimmages happen this spring so far. And he said that's a really good sign from your quarterbacks, is when they can really turn it on when the pressure amps up a little bit. And during, I think it was like the second or first spring practice where they had the media come and take a look at what was going on. And I remember watching KJ Lacey a little bit, and he looked the part, missed a few throws here and there. That's going to happen, of course, for a freshman. But now that we're at the end of spring practice, almost, it's clear that Stark has seen improvement from him, and so I think that's really positive for the quarterback room, and that should make Texas fans feel a lot better moving forward. For the days of when Arch eventually does leave. Obviously, we're still not even into his first season as a starter, but you always got to prepare for the future, and Stark and staff have been doing that their entire time here. And so I think there's a lot to feel good about if you're a Texas fan when it comes to the quarterbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, I hesitate to say the deepest quarterback room they've had in a long time, because they had Quinn and Arch last year, and then they had Trey Owens behind him. But I think that going forward, I think this is probably shaping up to be a long time position of strength for the program after some years of insecurity, and like you had Sam Ehlinger, but behind him, if something went wrong with Sam, you weren't really sure what you had. And now you legitimately have three guys who, going forward, have a chance to be really good players. And Arch is, by all accounts, going to be here for a couple of years, and then it'll be Trey Owens or KJ Lacey's chance. And then after that, you got Diabell coming in, and you've got your other quarterbacks that you're talking to beyond that in the 2027, 2028 class. So really exciting position for a quarterback guru to sort of develop and groom with Sark. And you really like their upside and their chances there. I watched a lot of Trey Owens at Elite 11 in Austin a couple years ago, and I was really impressed with what he could do. He's got a cannon of an arm. He can make all the throws. KJ Lacey's a different player, but he still has all the tools that you want. He's a little undersized, but he can move around really well. He's super accurate. So a lot of things to like there about the Texas quarterback room. and a lot to be excited about going forward. Sark also talked about the incoming transfers, more specifically Emmett Mosley and Jack Endries at wide receiver and tight end. There was a lot of concern about the wide receiver room in terms of experience and depth coming into this spring practice, because you had Ryan Wingo and you had DeAndre Moore, and then a lot of guys who had never really played football at the college level before. They really like Parker Livingstone. They really like Jamie French and Khalil Lockett and Dalen McCutcheon and Michael Terry and these young guys. They like Aaron Butler. But, in terms of actual college snaps, there wasn't a lot to sort of sit back and be confident about outside of DeAndre Moore, because even Ryan Wingo was kind of in and out of the lineup last year due to injury and being a freshman, trying to get into that circle of trust for a period of time there. When he had his opportunities, he was obviously very good, but you still wanted to add another piece of real, experience and production. They got that with Emmett Mosley. He's going to have 3 years of eligibility left, which is huge, but he also exploded onto the scene as a freshman. Was one of the top receivers in the ACC last year with Stanford. And then you also got a replacement for Gunnar Helm, who it was kind of a similar situation to the wide receiver room, right? You had a bunch of guys that didn't really have experience and that were talented, but you didn't know what you were going to get. Now, not only do they have a wide receiver in Emmett Mosley, they have Endries as well, who Sark raved about in terms of how he can fit into this team. Tell us a little bit about what Sark said about both of these guys and how they're going to fit into what they do.
Yeah, I believe they're the only two spring transfers he can officially talk about as of now, because they're the only ones that officially signed. I may have to double check that, but that's what that's the only two people he talked about yesterday, despite them having some other guys that are going to be coming in here soon. But yeah, with Mosley, he even admitted, and I thought this was a good quote from Sark. He said that they were recruiting him, Mosley, during his senior year in high school, but a knee injury that he suffered, had the coaching staff feel a little bit hesitant, and that's the nature of this game, and that's kind of cruel in a way, the cruel part of football, But you got to understand that from their perspective, they're like, okay, well, we had to move on and potentially look at other guys, but now that we see him burst onto the scene as a freshman at Stanford and in an offense that was not very good to begin with. They're like, okay, he's in the portal. We have a chance to recruit this guy once again, and they did it. And so, I think that he's going to be a big time next year for them. Obviously not a veteran guy, but a year of college football under your belt, as a one of the top pass catchers for that team last year. Wasn't the leading receiver, but a guy that can bring a veteran-ish presence to a room that's super, super young would definitely help. You don't really see Ryan Wingo as a veteran, even though he's also only had 1 year under his belt. But 1 year is more than some of these guys already have. So I think that he's gonna be big time. And when it came to Jack Endries, he is a veteran this point, and that there's no debating that. And so they really did need that. They arguably needed a tight end more than they potentially needed a receiver, in my opinion, because there's the receiving room was undeniable, but the tight end room with just tons of question marks. They also had Jordan Washington getting injured during spring practice. He hasn't really been practicing a lot at all. So Sark said that Jack Endries can have some explosiveness, add some explosiveness to this offense, and you definitely saw that during his time at Cal. I mean, this guy has some speed as a tight end. He's faster than Gunnar Helm. I don't know about Jatavian Sanders. I might have to see them run 40s next to each other, but he's a weapon for sure. And Sark talked about his inline blocking as a play action guy potentially that can leak out. We saw Gunnar Helm do that a ton, obviously, during his time at Texas. So a lot to be excited about there. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what he has to say about some of the other guys that are going to be coming in here, like Murad Watson as well.
Yeah, and the thing about Endries too is, he fits that role that Gunnar Helm left so well. Like, one of the things that Sark really preached about was that he can do everything. And Texas didn't have a tight end on the roster, I don't think, that they felt could do everything. Like, Jordan Washington is a great athlete. He'll be a very dynamic receiver, but but I believe he probably still has some things to work on in terms of pass blocking and run blocking and those kinds of things. Spencer Shannon also similar idea. He still has some traits to his game that he needs to improve on. Jack Endries is already a complete thing, right? He's a guy who not only can you rely on in the pass game, not only does he have some explosive aspects to his game, but he can also be that guy that can recognize a defense, be fully locked in with Arch when he's making checks at the line. Like one of the most important plays, arguably the most important play of Texas's football season, was that 4th and 13 against Arizona State, when Arizona State was bringing the house and Quinn checked at the line, brought Gunnar Helm into block instead of going out on his route. And that gave him the time to hit Matthew Golden over the top. And then there was another one against Clemson where Gunnar Helm sort of broke his route off a little bit more, went higher, got open for a touchdown over the safety's head. Those are the kinds of things that Jack Endries is going to be able to do immediately. He's a smart guy. He can do it in the receiving game. He can make adjustments. So I think that was a huge thing that they added to their offense, and it really sort of takes it to another level where, I said before these transfers came in, I still thought Texas was a college football playoff contender and a national title contender. Now I'm sure of it because they filled these holes, even with the kicker, with Shipley and Murad Watson and Levon Johnson on the defensive line. Now they have so many pieces of depth and aspects of their roster that were maybe a little bit questionable that they've now really solidified. So big things from Texas there in the transfer portal. The one other thing that we wanted to discuss that Sark talked about that I thought was extremely interesting was Justice Terry, because going into, before they got Levon Johnson and Murad Watson, you still weren't quite sure. I mean, there was some players there with Travis Shaw and Cole Brevard and Hero Canoe, and then they had Alex January and Melvin Hills at defensive tackle alongside Justice Terry. But you weren't really sure what that was all going to look like in terms of rotations and things like that. Now you're very solidified in that depth, and you can sort of move Justice Terry around because he's such an incredible athlete. He can do multiple things. You don't have to sort of lock him into playing defensive tackle, and you can use him elsewhere. Sark mentioned that he had been working as sort of a strong side defensive end type player and a little bit more in the pass rush. And I think that's extremely interesting because that just gives you another weapon to go after the passer for an already elite edge rushing group. You can move this guy around and create a bunch of different problems and different matchups. What were your impressions of what Sark said about Terry, and do you think that that's going to be a good fit for him?
Yeah, I think it could be a good fit for sure. I mean, he's not going to be like Colin Simmons was this past season. This guy, Justice Terry, is not going to. It's very unlikely, in my opinion, that he'll lead the team sacks. There's just too much talent on this defensive line, and Colin Simmons is still here, obviously. So it's going to be tough, but that sounds like very exciting if you're a Texas fan for seeing Justice Terry potentially coming off the edge eventually. I just think that with the additions of Levon Johnson and Murad Watson, they're more true defensive tackles. They didn't put up huge sack numbers. I think they come into Austin with the combined 2 career sacks. So they're not going to be putting up major sack numbers. That's important not to get too lost in those numbers as well. But so trying out Justice Terry on the edge could be nice. He's more defensive, interior defensive lineman, but he's obviously got that ability. And I liked what he was talking about with Trey Moore as well. We kind of already have heard it before from Sark, but using Trey Moore off the edge, using him, dropping him back in pass coverage as well. He's going to be lining up, with those guys, and seeing what he can do in his second year at Texas will be super exciting. But yeah, there's just tons to be excited about with that entire group and that entire line. It was still exciting even before the portal additions, but now you add in, Watson and Levon Johnson already to a talented group, and it's there's a lot of potential there next season for Texas to continue their run of elite defensive lines that they've had during the Sark era. So, and he also pointed out that Brad Spence, Arkansas linebacker, transfer, that he was taking some reps off the edge as well. So they're just trying out all these guys. They clearly have an eye for versatile athletes on defense. And so we'll see how it goes, but they can hit offenses with a ton of different stuff next season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the thing that he mentioned about Trey Moore kind of also gets me a little bit excited, because it's sort of a similar role that Jalen Walker played for Georgia last year, where he's primarily a linebacker, but he can come after the passer anytime. He's an elite edge rusher. Trey Moore is all of those things. Is he going to be a top 10 pick like Jalen Walker? Probably not, but he has some of those same aspects to his game where, you're going to have a lot of different ways that you can attack opposing offenses on the edge this year. And let's not forget, Anthony Hill is an extremely good pass rusher out of that linebacker spot as well. So they've got a bunch of talent there. You can't forget about Leonga Lafau either. He's been one of the best linebackers in camp so far. So not only are you deep on the edge, not only are you deep on in the interior of the defensive line, you're also super deep at linebacker. And all of these guys can do a lot of different things. And this has a chance to be one of Texas's best front sevens that they've had in quite some time. So that's really exciting stuff, and something that we're going to be watching a lot for early on in the season next year, when they come right out of the gates and they play Ohio State in week 1, who's a very, very talented roster themselves. All right, so we've been kind of burying the lead here a little bit. Obviously, there's this big thing happening tonight called the NFL Draft, and I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's kind of a big deal. And Texas has a real opportunity this weekend to do something special. Last year, they already set a program record with 11 players drafted. This year, they have a chance to break that number and potentially shatter it. And they even have an outside chance of setting the all-time record for players drafted in a single draft. That record's currently held by Georgia at 15 players, I believe. And, depending on what happens with Isaiah Bond and a couple of these other guys who are, fringe 7th-round picks like David Benda and Bill Norton and guys like that, they could have, some anywhere between 12 and 15 to 16 players drafted. Obviously, the second number there is a little bit more lofty of a goal, but they have a legitimate opportunity to break a program record for a second year in a row. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into a mock draft. We're going to dive into Todd McShay's mock draft. And he released his final mock this morning. And we're just going to kind of go through, briefly talk about, some of these picks, and we're going to talk about the Longhorns as well. There, right off the bat, we should probably preface this by saying there's an opportunity for trades to happen. Cleveland and New York and the New York Giants have both been reported to be shopping their number 2 and number 3 picks. So this could change, obviously, and the NFL draft is also very unpredictable, so anything could happen in terms of where some of these players land. But one thing that everybody seems pretty confident about is the number 1 pick. Tennessee and Cam Ward seem like a match made in heaven at this point. It seems like almost a lock. McShay has Tennessee going Cam Ward at number 1, so no surprise there. Travis Hunter at number 2 to Cleveland. And he even calls Travis Hunter the NFL Shohei Ohtani, which I think is a bit of a hyperbolic take, but we'll take it. And then Abdul Carter to the Giants at number 3, and Will Campbell to the Patriots at number 4. So right there, there's not really too many surprises. Cam Ward seems like a lock. Travis Hunter, Cleveland would be foolish to pass on him if they don't trade out of that pick. Abdul Carter, generational edge rusher prospect. New York, would love to get a quarterback, but they have a chance to do that later. And then, the Patriots desperately needed to protect Drake May, so adding Will Campbell right there is a logical move for them too. So any surprises there to you? Anything that stands out to you there?
No surprises. I think that Tennessee has essentially made it all but official that they're going to select Cam Ward. I mean, we saw Chicago saying outright that they're going to select Caleb Williams. Tennessee has essentially done, that to the extent of not saying, okay, we're not going to select them, but it's pretty obvious at this point. And no surprises really there in the top 5. I think that Ashton Genty, the Jacksonville Jaguars, number 5, is pretty interesting. We saw some potential that Las Vegas could have interest in him, but we'll see how that goes. But kind of segues into the number 6 pick for Las Vegas is Kelvin Banks out of Texas, of course, and McShay calls him a franchise stalwart, and I think that that's definitely true. And we saw Sark talk about that on Tuesday when he was asked about Kelvin Banks. He said, whoever's getting this guy is getting a guy that's going to be in the league for maybe 12 years. And so I can definitely see that, barring injury. He didn't have, too many injury problems during his time in Texas. Obviously, he had that ankle he was dealing with during the SEC championship that kept him out. But, kind of interesting there because we saw Quinn Ewers say that he'd be interested in potentially going to Las Vegas if the opportunity presented itself. He had some good conversations apparently with Pete Carroll, obviously the new Las Vegas coach. So,
and there are Sark connections there as well with Pete Carroll. So that's something of note as well.
Absolutely. We've heard Sark talk about Pete Carroll for years now at this point, and we know how much he means to him. So yeah, no, good point there. But being able to see Kelvin Banks potentially protect Quinn down the line. Quinn's probably not going to be a full-time starter or anything during his rookie season, but seeing that eventually happen down the line would be super interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And there was a lot of talk that I think both of us and, over on my my show on Texas Sports Unfiltered with my co-host Patrick Davis that we've talked about a lot is we never really understood why the Kelvin Banks in the 20s thing was happening. He proved for 3 years that he was the best tackle in college football. He won all the awards last year for it. He was a unanimous All-American. That stuff doesn't happen by accident. So, and I also saw another interesting quote about, I can't remember where I saw it, so I'll have to go back and check where it was. But there was a question. I think it was Albert Breer on Sports Illustrated. Actually, now that I think about it, he was talking about Banks, and he asked an NFL executive, there are some questions about Banks, and what are your opinions on these? And the guy basically said, you mean from non-NFL people? Because we don't see anything. Like this guy's an elite prospect. So as the last week has gone by, you've seen Kelvin sort of slingshot himself back up into that top 10 conversation. And it almost feels like it's almost a lock at this point that he could go, and at least in the top 10. Worst case scenario, top 15. So, and there's also some teams like a Houston who would be extremely interested in trading up for him as well, and they're known to be aggressive. So, Kelvin Banks seems like he's going to be the first Longhorn off the board. As we continue down this mock draft from McShay, we see Jalen Walker to the Jets at 7. We see Walter Nolan to the Panthers at 8, which I think is very interesting because Mason Graham is still on the board at this point. But you're really starting to see a run of defensive linemen here. The Saints take Mikael Williams from Georgia, and sort of a Cameron Jordan mentorship situation because he's entering the final year of his deal, and he's in his the late stages of his career. So having an opportunity for Williams to learn from a guy like that would be huge. The Bears then take Mason Graham at number 10. In this mock, and that's the Bears had a fantastic offseason. They can kind of pick and choose what they do here. They'd love to get a running back, but with Genty already off the board, they can solidify that defensive line. And then we get into the 49ers taking Shamar Stewart at number 11. Putting him opposite of Nick Bosa would be a very scary proposition for opposing offenses there. And then the Dallas Cowboys selecting Teteroa McMillan at number 12. This is a spot where a lot of people think that Matthew Golden could go. McShay believes here that the Cowboys are the team that McMillan is the guy that the Cowboys would go with here. He thinks there's a lot of smoke that McMillan could go higher, even to the Jaguars at number 5. But in this case, he falls and the Cowboys can scoop him up. I think this is a great pick for the Cowboys. I would be totally happy with McMillan or Matthew Golden. Both guys fit extremely well into that offense. What are your impressions on McMillan to the Cowboys?
Yeah, definitely interesting. We've talked about it before, that we have maybe a little bit of Texas bias with Matthew Golden potentially wanting to go to Dallas and being able to see him still play in the Lone Star State. But McMillan, he's an explosive guy, a super great run after the catch, can make tough contested catches. We saw that at Arizona. I know they didn't have the best season last year, but he extremely talented guy that put up monstrous numbers. Putting him as number 2 next to CD Lamb with Jalen Tolbert as number 3. I've seen Tolbert really emerge this past season as a guy that they can rely on. And so I think those 3 guys, that's a really good trio to use for Dallas and for Dak Prescott. So, but regardless of if McMillan goes at 12 or Golden, as we see in this mock, and we'll talk about in a second, either one of those guys is going to potentially drop significantly based on just pure need from the teams that are after them. So, yeah, we'll see what happens. But Millen to the Cowboys is definitely something to be excited about. If you're Texas and Dallas Cowboys fan, of course you're going to want to see Matthew Golden going to Dallas. But nothing to be disappointed at all about for McMillan, because he's an elite guy that can immediately contribute as a rookie next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And we'll kind of fly through these next couple of picks until we get to our next Longhorn. McShay has the Dolphins picking Armand Mimbo, the tackle out of Missouri at number 13. Tyler Warren, the number 1 tight end in the draft, going to the Colts at 14. James Pierce Jr., edge out of Tennessee, 15 to the Falcons. Jihad Campbell, the linebacker out of Alabama, to the Cardinals at number 16. He's a guy that the Cowboys, I think, are also looking at. He's a little bit similar to Jalen Walker in the fact that he can come off the edge and he can be just a very good linebacker for that group. And then the Bengals take Mike Green, an edge out of Marshall, at 17. Seahawks go Gray Zabel, offensive guard out of North Dakota State, at 18. Will Johnson, corner out of Michigan, goes to Tampa Bay at number 19. This is a spot where it could be either him or Jahdae Barron as the first true corner off the board outside of Travis Hunter. And then Colston Loveland to the Broncos at 20. Pittsburgh takes an interior defensive lineman, Derek Harmon, out of Oregon at 21. So they're going to pass on their quarterback there, according to McShay. And then you have another defensive lineman, big run on defensive lineman here. Kenneth Grant to the Chargers out of Michigan. Jim Harbaugh guy, 331 pounds. That they need to replace Poona Ford, former Longhorn there. So that's a good pick for them. Maxwell Hairston jumps Jahdae Barron to Green Bay at number 23 out of Kentucky. He's the fastest player at the combine, one of the best corners in the country for sure. So I could see Jahdae Barron going there as well, but we do have Jahdae Barron going to the Vikings, which I think is an extremely good fit for him. He goes to the Vikings at 24. He's an absolute steal at this spot. He fits great into the Brian Flores defense. He can do it all. He can play in the slot. He can play a little safety if you need him to. He can play on the outside. He's one of the best players really we've ever seen at dislodging the ball also from a receiver with contested catches. So I think this is a great pick and a great spot for Barron. What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before when we saw a mock with him potentially going to Miami, having to go up against Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, going up against Justin Jefferson in practice potentially will definitely have him ready for his rookie season, that's for sure. And so that'd be pretty exciting to see him with Brian Flores and that defense. Minnesota, I know they kind of struggled towards the back end of last season, but their defense was elite. And so seeing him join that unit would be really nice. And I know there's been some concerns potentially with Jahdae about maybe his length. He's not the longest guy. He's not the tallest guy, but he also played 5 years at Texas. So there's always that concern, his age issue. And so I think he still has a lot to prove wrong, despite him being, essentially a first round lock. He's got a lot of people to prove wrong. So we'll see what happens there. And I think that it's definitely a steal at 24. We saw some mocks earlier on in the process that I'm going, a little bit earlier than that. But Harrison from Kentucky definitely solidified his spot with his 40 time at the combine. So wouldn't be disappointing at all for Jade if he's a 24th overall pick. That's something that Texas fans wouldn't have predicted probably when he first arrived in Austin, but he always kept the faith in himself and what he could do. So, good for him if that happens that way. But and then you see at 25, another guy who kind of was off the radar a few years ago, Matthew Golden, going to the Houston Texans with the 25th pick. And, like we said with McMillan to the Cowboys at 12, depending on who they want, there could be a big drop with either one of those guys because of the need that teams have a receiver. So Matthew Golden going back to Houston, where he's from, went to U of H, Klein Cain High School, with Jaden Blue, their cousins. So being able to go back home, play in front of his family, that'd be quite a story for him to join a receiving room that took a lot of hits this past season. We lost Stephon Diggs in free agency. Tank Dell is probably going to be out the entire season as he still recovers from that gruesome injury that he had. And, putting Matthew Golden as potentially the number 2 guy next to Nico Collins. I think that's pretty exciting if you're a Texans fan.
Yeah, and they've also got Christian Kirk on that roster too, so they're going to have with Golden, they'll have a legitimate 3-headed monster at wide receiver that can cause a lot of problems and be good for CJ Stroud, who they thought they were going to have that last year, but then Stephon Diggs leaves and Tank Dill has his injury, so this is another opportunity with a different and younger group without Stephon Diggs in there to really have a dynamic passing attack there in H-Town. And then, after that, we'll just jump right into the rest of the round before we close out here. McShay has the Rams taking Emeka Egbuka 1 pick later. He'd be a great fit in Sean McVay's system. So, he's going to be next to Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams there. So that would be another really, really elite receiving core. They also have Tutu Atwell. So great things there for the Rams, who I am personally a fan of because of my connection to Matthew Stafford and that kind of thing. So love seeing that. The Ravens go Malachi Starks at number 27, the safety out of Georgia, but he can play a little bit, he could play everywhere in the secondary as well. So he'll be a dynamic player for them. And then McShay has his first trade here at number 28. He has the Giants trading number 34 and 99 to the Detroit Lions for pick number 28. And he has the Giants getting their quarterback. They go with Jackson Dart over Shedeur Sanders. This totally makes sense to me. I think Jackson Dart is head and shoulders above Shedeur Sanders in terms of tools and athletic ability and those kinds of things. So, he's not Josh Allen. I'm not saying he's Josh Allen, but he's Josh Allen-like in the sense of the way that he likes to play with his legs, and he has a cannon of an arm. So I think that would be a really good fit with Brian Daboll there in New York. And then we jump down to the Commanders at number 29, going Donovan Ezuraku. I'm sorry I butchered that pronunciation. The edge out of Boston College gives them another pass rusher there. And then the Bills go with a corner, Siobhan Revell out of East Carolina. Probably the biggest corner in the draft. I think he's 6'3". He's fast. He's super athletic. So that gives them, it really fills their biggest need there. He has offensive tackle Josh Simmons going to the Chiefs at number 31. Again, this makes a ton of sense given the Chiefs' concerns at their tackle spots. They had some issues there last year with penalties and things like that. So that, kind of solidifies things for Patrick Mahomes there. And then they have the Eagles taking Mason Taylor, tight end out of LSU. They could go in a variety of different directions here. They're the best team in football. They're deep. They're super talented. So it's kind of a luxury pick for them here at number 32, just adding another weapon for Jalen Hurts. And then he gives us a couple of bonus picks here. Number 33, Cleveland Browns. He has taking Shedeur Sanders with the first pick of the second round. Makes a ton of sense. He could team up with Travis Hunter. They need a quarterback badly. Deshaun Watson's not going to play next year, more than likely due to his injury. So that makes a lot of sense there. And then finally, he got the Detroit Lions, number 34. After that trade with New York, they take JT Tuimoloau, the defensive tackle out of Ohio State. So, he played edge last year, but he's probably going to fit more inside, or he could play either way. He's a very talented guy. So, again, McShay is one of these guys who really has his ear to the ground. He knows what's going on. So this has been one of my favorite mock drafts that I've seen so far. There's a couple of question marks I have, as with any mock draft. But, when McShay was breaking down this mock on his YouTube channel, he said something very interesting that, makes a lot of sense. He said, in terms of the accuracy of these, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said, in terms of the accuracy of these mock drafts, there's a lot of questions. But I'll tell you this, if all 32 NFL GMs sat in a room and said, this is what we're going to do, and they discussed it, they would still get it wrong. So anything can happen. We'll see where some of these Longhorns land. A lot of guys from Texas could come off the board in the second round, third round. I think they're going to have a few day 2 picks, but we'll see where these guys land. Texas has an opportunity, like we said before we started this, to do something really special and break another school record for the second year in a row, which would be a great recruiting tool for Sark down the line. Zach, let's close out the show with this. We're each gonna give 2 bold predictions for the draft tonight. I'll let you go first. What is your first bold prediction?
Well, it kind of reminded me of what my bold prediction was when I saw Shedeur going 33 of the Cleveland Browns in McShay's draft. I think that I'm gonna take a step further. Tyler Shuck, Louisville quarterback, former Oregon guy. That guy, his name's been floating around a lot. I'm gonna take it a step further and say that he's gonna go 33 to the Browns, and Shedeur will fall after him. That's why it's called a bold prediction, everyone. So,
Yeah.
But Tyler Shuck has kind of been a hotter name as of late. I know there's been some doubts for sure about him with his age and all that stuff, but I think that that's gonna be my bold prediction on that end. And I think from a Texas Longhorns perspective, it may not be the boldest prediction, but I'm gonna say that Gavin Holmes gets drafted, regardless of where that is, in 7th round. I think he gets drafted. I think a team takes a chance on him. I was gonna potentially say Silas Bolden gets drafted, but I really don't think that's a bold prediction at all. I think that he can bring a lot of value to any team that he goes to. So I think Gavin Holmes is more of a bolder prediction on that front. What about you?
Yeah. Okay. My first bold prediction is that, and I guess it's not that bold of a prediction now that I think about it, because McShay has him doing this. But my first one was Shedeur is not going to be a first-round pick. I think there's been too much smoke about it lately, and the things that Tom Pelissero came out with a report with a bunch of NFL executives who were saying things about Shedeur that really gave you some pause. So I think that's my first one. I don't think he's a first-round pick. And then my other one, I was going to say Kelvin Banks, but I've also heard some change. I'm changing on the fly here. I think my other bold prediction is that Jahdae Barron goes in the top 10. There's been some smoke around him in the New York Jets, and Aaron Glenn is a former defensive back. He's the new head coach there. I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibility for them to go in that direction and really, solidify their secondary with Jahdae Barron and Sauce Gardner there. Gives you, an elite cornerback room. And, he's a Thorpe Award winner for a reason, and he's the best cornerback in the country last year. So I think, teams really like what he can do. And with a defensive coach who's got a secondary background, it wouldn't be crazy to see him go secondary there at pick number 7. Zach, let's wrap it up. We're going to be watching the draft tonight. We'll have a ton of coverage over there at Texas Longhorns on SI for, all the latest picks and all the latest news. But, that's going to do it for another edition of the Lone Star Lowdown podcast. You can listen to us pretty much on every major platform out there, from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Pocket Casts, and any of the other ones that you enjoy. We're also live on X, Facebook, and YouTube every day. We're typically going to be on in the mornings, but it could vary depending on our work schedules here a little bit. But we'll do our best to be on every day for you, so you can catch us on those streaming platforms as well. Also, don't forget to check out Texas Longhorns on SI for all your latest news and notes regarding Longhorn sports. And if you enjoyed the podcast here today, make sure to hit the like button and the sub button on your favorite platform. Do it right now, please. But most importantly, be sure to tell somebody you love them, and we'll see you on the next one.
We'll be back. Yes, sir.
Fight.